Do you see the link on Facebook?
I'm looking at Tim right now, 14 of them right now. Just now, there's a link to
Okay.
YouTube. Yeah. Doesn't have anything there yet because you're not running.
Okay, you should see something any minute now as I hit play.
He's doing something. I'm hearing me.
It's backwards.
Just now.
Let's go out. Hey everyone, can you? Hopefully you can hear me and see me. We had a little problem. Tim would not allow me to. Facebook wouldn't allow me to live stream from Facebook, so I had to do a little workaround. And noticing for some reason it flipped all my video, the incoming. So hopefully you can see me. I don't think I have chat turned on in YouTube. So if you can see this in Facebook, go ahead and try to comment there. We'll see how this goes. We've been having a little trouble with Facebook. I noticed posts. I'm, even as the administrator, haven't been able to find them. Sorry, I'm looking off to the side. I'm trying to figure out what's going on the Facebook side of things. Um, so yeah, it's been different. It's been a while. I usually work in YouTube, so it's been a bit for me to try and figure out the Facebook after they changed things with the live. But I can go live from the other pages, and I didn't want to do it personally from my page. So hopefully you can. You are tuning in live or checking out Tim on replay. I really appreciate you stopping in. There were a lot of people reaching out to me to say, hey, let's get this going. There's questions, there's things happening. What's help us, help us understand, or can you give me clarification? And it got to the point where it was really taking on its own life. So rather than individually addressing things, I felt the best way to do it would be to come back here. And but for those of you who are new, I'm Danny Smith, my friend, well, Danielle Smith. My friends call me Danny. And I just want to review a little bit with what Tim is. I haven't done a live in a really long time, and I hope to not have to make them be regular occurrences. But if I do, we will. Again, I don't think I have chat turned on in YouTube. So if you post a comment to the Facebook link, which you might have to go out to do that, I apologize. This was crazy trying to get it set up to. There's me. Um, but so, I apologize for the delay and appreciate you checking in. But back in 2018, a neighbor had asked me to come to a meeting. The council was looking to shut down the canine program. And there was a lot of controversy going on at the time about information that was being put out to the public not being correct or being misconstrued. And, so I didn't even start Tim. Tim kind of started with live streaming the meetings because you had to go in order to see what was going on. And there was dispute about did it happen, didn't it happen? And that was actually done largely by Dan Colgan. He's currently the borough council president. When he decided to run for council, he pretty much took a hands-off approach to Tim and said, you know what, I'm just going to be a candidate and a resident. You take this and run with it. So since that time, it's been me. I take responsibility for anything I say or post on here. I've gotten things wrong over the years, and when I have, I've tried to come back and correct it. Usually it's about things that were happening outside of McSherrystown, because we did touch on that a bit too back in the early days. And it was really just trying to open things up to the public so we had a better grasp of what was going on in McSherrystown and the surrounding municipalities. So I talked about misinformation because it was proven 2018, 2019, and beyond that the former council um, was not was saying one thing and doing another thing. And I don't just expect you to take my word for it. There were emails, there were videos, there were voicemails, there was documentation galore showing this. And I would find it, or other people would bring it to me, and I'd put it out for you to review and make up your own mind. And that's really what the premise of this is. When you deserve a full picture, vote for whoever you want, support whoever you want, but you should be doing that on the complete picture. And that's not happening again. There are some things coming out. There were a couple articles in the paper, and that's the primary focus of what we're going to talk on, that misrepresented some information. And I don't know if the reporter willingly, wittingly, unwittingly did that, or how it happened. But I had a red flag moment. This is about. Agree with every vote, every procedure, every action taken by the current council. But I have found no evidence that they were intentionally doing things. There was no intentional hiding of information that I've had proof of. I didn't agree with the IPMC. I didn't agree the way that it was presented or handled. But I talked to the people that were doing that and asked them questions and presented my side, my concerns. There were other things that, I thought, well, why'd you do it that way? Or why'd you handle it this way? Some things I address when I think it matters, and other things I didn't, but I do it through the chair or the manager or the proper person, not attack. The only time I come out and speak at meetings or do this kind of thing is when I see something that truly is detrimental to the whole, the community. And with it coming into election, um, that's even more important. Rumors always fly. You'll always hear so and so said this, or these things happened around town, but this is beyond that. There's been about a year and a half that I haven't done lives, and some people have asked me why. And it was during the summer of 2020. I was having some health problems that started to, come to light. And I wasn't even as active in the 2021 municipal election. It wasn't because I didn't think it was important. It was because I was preparing to have surgery and trying to get my health issues, underway. So thankfully, I'm back on track with that. I have a clean bill of health. I'm still not 100%, but every day's getting better. So, when I saw those same things flaring up and we're heading into an election, I was just like, yeah, you need the full story, or at least you need more of the story than what you're getting. I don't like people intentionally misinforming the public with intent to harm others, or in trying to deceive people for their own benefit, for personal gain. Vote for whoever you want for. I really want you to get out there and vote, but I want you to cast those votes based on facts. And I'm really hoping to see that in 2023, we have as many people come out for election as they did in, 2019. The election office was like, I don't know what y'all did down in McSherrystown, but could you keep doing it? So I'd like to see those numbers again. And hopefully, you're going to take an interest because you don't like being lied to. You don't like being gaslit. You don't like to see other people attempt to, active abuse, reactive abuse in a situation. And if you don't know what those terms are, I know what you know what those things are, but we'll talk about those. Um, it's a manipulation. It's a manipulation technique, and it's happening. And I think you have a right to know about it, and that you should know about it definitely before we go into an election cycle. So, in short, gaslighting really is when someone manipulates you into thinking versions of events didn't happen the way you say they happened. They may gaslight you by questioning your authority, denying the evidence you have, doing everything they can to make you feel like you're wrong or you're crazy or that you know you you're the problem. And reactive abuse, it's when a manipulative individual or an abuser pushes pusher, setting up a scenario where an individual reacts and claims victim status and claims to be the targeted individual, when the actual victim stands themselves or tries to hold them accountable for what they did. You might think of a bully in a classroom setting where they reach out and pull the hair of another classmate. And the person who had their hair pulled will either yell out and say, stop it, or they might even smack their hand away. The bully will then either be like, they hit me, and then try to make it seem like they're the problem, or cry foul, like, I don't know why she's yelling. I didn't do anything. So, like, in that sense, gaslighting and reactive abuse go hand in hand. And I think if you look back at meetings, you can see that happening time and time again. I don't care what you call it, but that's, in my opinion, what I've been seeing happen at these meetings. And now it's happening with the aid of the Gettysburg Times. And again, knowingly or unknowingly, they're participating in this. And I really tried to give Jim Hale, who's the author of the 3 articles that we're going to talk about, the benefit of the doubt as a reporter, because my understanding, he's been around a while. They will tell you, we're not investigative journalists, but if you cover the area for a while and you know the area, then you know what's going on, or at least you should. But time and time again, he seems to get some things right and some things really wrong, or just wrong enough to completely skew the events of what happened. And again, trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. But in the first story we're going to talk about, when he omits or twists information and intentionally, it's intentional at that point to misrepresent what he's trying to get to believe. And this is my opinion, but I'm telling you why my opinion, unknowingly, but he really seems to be participating in what appears to be Joe Von Sass's political campaign election strategy. So, and some of this counts on you looking through this through a pinhole and only looking at these individual events and nothing before, after, or around it. So if you look cumulatively at Joe Von Sass's effort to interject, disrupt, and cause disturbances at meetings, and not just his, this has been a pattern from former council members Pasco and Rob Nider. Well, Rob wasn't really on the 2020 council, so Steve was. So the people from that old council who were still trying to manipulate the situation, you could see them doing that. They were trying to slide things in. They were trying to interject things in that shouldn't be there. And I apologize. This is going to be a longer live than I normally like to do, but there's a lot of information. And hopefully going forward, if we have to do this again, we'll keep it condensed. But I am going to break down for you, why and how I came to the conclusion, what Hale, Von Sass, his supporters, and potentially even running mates are counting on. Like I said, it's a short memory as a community. And so between now and November, we're going to talk about all the things that led to the turnover in 2020. And it'll be up to you to decide if you think that's okay. But we're going to talk about the details that aren't being shared with you. So we're going to have a broad view of these incidents more so than a pinhole. So the first one, Mr. Hale covered a zoning hearing board meeting, And I don't really recall ever seeing coverage, but at a zoning hearing board meeting, I haven't attended a lot. We don't have a ton of them in McSherrystown, but even out in the regular municipal setting, unless there's like a large crowd or a wide interest, like when they were doing the proposed joint gun range in Conewago Township, then you saw a lot of interest, media and community. So it makes sense to have coverage there. Now, one could say this was a hearing requested by a sitting council member, and that makes it of community interest. And that's a fair point. I agree. But when's the last time you saw a reporter converse with a petitioner saying, who's a sitting council member, and assure them, don't worry, I got all the names that were on the sign-in sheet, which that was like a yellow flag for me. There seemed to be a very familiar connection between these two. And saw reporters on a friendly conversational level outside of a meeting while intentionally walking away from other officials and public to be out of earshot. Casually chatting as with an old friend. Those are other flags that say, hey, there might be a personship here. And then running stories that are suspiciously slanted in favor of that person, especially when they're not really reflective of actual events. They're skewing content or blatant misinformation. I don't know when the last time I saw a reporter witness a heated exchange where a petitioner who's a sitting council member and their spouse substantially raise their voice and yell loudly at a borough representative, the zoning code enforcement officer, to the point where police came over to investigate and intervene by suggesting, the meeting was adjourned, everybody should clear out, but not report the heated exchange. If you read that article, Mr. Hales made it sound like there was a polite offer to walk the property, and that it was odd that the police would come over and move everybody along. So why would Mr. Hale omit that? He was there to cover it. Maybe because it would have looked bad for Joe. It wouldn't have fit the narrative of the story that he and Joe were trying to spin, nor aid in Joe's reelection bid. That's when I had a big red flag this story. So if you go back to the meeting, and I'll explain a little what occurred. The attorney gave the instruction, he was presiding over the meeting, for a petitioner to have an exception of a variance approved. You had to meet certain conditions. You have to show the property can't be used for its designated zoning purposes, and that any hardships to use that could not be at the hands of the landowner. For example, I couldn't have a property zoned ag and then dump mounds of dirt and hardscaping material like rocks or concrete and then claim I can't use it as ag and farm it because of the terrain. That would be an alteration that I made. Nor could I build a building and claim it couldn't be used because that building made it so I couldn't use it. That's not a naturally occurring obstacle, so it doesn't establish land use hardship. When Joe's attorney asked his own engineer, can this be used as residential, which is zoned? His own engineer said, well, it can, but there are some buildings on that would have to either be partially or fully removed. And, so right there, the engineer testified that it could be used for zoning designated purposes, and that the only hindrance to that were buildings that were man-made, and they would have to be, fully or partially removed. So right there, he didn't meet the criteria. Joe's attorney then pleaded financial hardship. However, the zoning hearing board isn't allowed to make a decision based on financial detriment or advantage of a petitioner. Only land use hardship, which was not demonstrated, can be considered. So, he did present hardship, but not the kind that they're allowed to take into consideration, because it would be wrong if they made a decision, to benefit or at detriment to a petitioner. Joe also presented information about prior exceptions or variances, which are generally not transferred or conveyed with property sales, and prior use, which can play an important part in a board's decision, but they also have to look at the conditions around the prior use, the current requirement, on what said in hearing, because I didn't see the petition or the document that was filled out, it appeared as though that the application was not specific and lacked information for the board to make a decision. Now, they could have rejected the application because it wasn't specific, but instead they didn't. They asked questions, which then became part of the quasi-jurisdictional hearing transcript. So they could use that information because it was part of the official transcript. So both Joe and his wife testified. 3 people spoke during the public comment section. I was one of them. And the one was a former employee, Luann. Oh gosh, I can't remember her last name, but off the top of my head. And then Dan Colgan, who was there as a resident, spoke. And the zoning hearing board recessed after the petitioner presented his case and public comment. Now, when the board came back with the decision, the petitioner would basically what they said, this isn't like verbatim, but basically what they said was the petitioner would be extended the same exception that was granted in 2013 with the same allowances and the same limitations that were set in 2013 hearing, but declared that all current violations must be remedied. So once it was adjourned and the business was taken care of, it seemed like the scope of what was being stated sunk in, which was much, much less than what was being asked for. And both the petitioner and his spouse approached the table where the zoning code enforcement officer was sitting. And that's when the yelling and raised voices started. And I'm not saying there was never a polite offer to walk the property as conveyed in the paper. But what I am saying is there was yelling, raised voices, and what I heard was, "You'll never step foot on my property again," and screaming, and it was, okay, I don't know if screaming, but there was yelling, raised voices, and close proximity, and it was very tense and very uncomfortable. The police officer, it might have been 2 of them that came over, were very polite. They didn't get excited. It was just kind of the meeting's adjourned. I think everybody should head out now. I actually stepped out of the room. I was considering going out the front door when I realized I had left something back in the chambers, because there's a handicap access out the front door. So I waited a moment till things calmed down. I could still see and hear everything that was going on. I just kind of stepped out of the way, gathered my stuff, and then walked out the door. But it was a very tense situation. They were very much in close proximity. It was not friendly and polite for a bit. And the reporter, who you would think there's reporting on public interest, completely omitted any mention of that exchange, which seemed, again, red flag. This is not someone who didn't have the information. They chose actively to omit that information. And that information would have led context to why the officer came in and asked people to leave, which he conveyed that part, but not what led them to do that. The details where voices were clearly expressing the petitioner's stance and that the code enforcement would not be allowed back on their property might have not benefited Mr. Von Sass or his friend's election bid if that was reported in that way. Even if he said raised voices or intense discussion. But no, instead, Mr. Hale chose to report a sanitized version of events, indicating a cooperative, polite exchange to walk the property, which deliberately misrepresented what occurred there. When Mr. Hale reported about the budget access, that was another article. What he failed to report was past practices and the extenuating circumstances or limitation on the current staff, skewing the story with phrases like many and very carefully worded leading questions to the State Media Association attorney. So I'm not going to deep dive into any of these stories because honestly, we would be here all night, and I don't want to do that to either of us. But a couple points of that. Mr. Hale reported that Joe said and this is a quote from the paper, I have a job, I work, and that did not allow me to spend time in here to look over that budget, said Von Sass. Von Sass was referring to in the council building and the budget. What Joe and Jim Hale conveniently left out is that Joe runs his own business and sets his own schedule. In fact, I've been told by previous staff that there have been complaints about the extended period of time Joe has previously spent in the office, as many as several hours just chatting. To be clear, I said former staff, not anybody who's in there right now, which could be a reason for the municipality to enforce section 22.4 of the McSherry, or dash 4 of the McSherrystown Borough Code. We're going to talk about that in a little more detail later, but that is an important thing that we will get to before I sign off. Joe also very conveniently left out that with nearly 3 weeks between the proposed budget and the budget adoption meeting, he waited until the Monday before to reach out, possibly as late as that afternoon, if I understood what was being said or exchanged on the video. And, at the meeting, because I went back and tried to listen to it so that I really understood. So he waited till the last possible minute to review the budget. And he did not, he complained about not being able to do it, but didn't even point out that Chief Woods, who's the COO, offered to accommodate the viewing around Joe's availability. Mr. Hale did note that Chief did correct the record and say that, hey, I invited you in, but either that was not shared with Mr. Hale or Mr. Hale decided to write it up in a way that made it seem like an afterthought. And he almost framed it like an excuse, and was very much skewing the circumstances here, in my opinion. And also, Mr. Hale put in there that the Media Association's attorney says there's no state law that restricts a council member from taking a draft copy out of the office. I don't recall anybody saying it was a law, a state law, that said you couldn't. It was, you're not required to release drafts. And if you look at language in the Sunshine, so it tells you what you have to do and what you don't have to do. And it was a reference to the some municipalities, which clearly indicates that there are municipalities that don't do that. I'm always going to fully support for a municipality to put out as much information as possible. And I'm going to touch on my speculation why that might not have happened in this case in a little bit, but that's really me taking a step off the path and telling you what I think based on past things that happened and that I can prove that we know. Furthermore, the State Media Association's attorney is quoted as saying, it's a bad policy to implement that kind of restriction on board members and to the public. And in general, I agree with that as a general practice. But there are legitimate reasons why, and in this case, why I, in this setting, would have been equally cautious based on historical practice and past activities, because context means something. And a lawyer telling you a general, this isn't a good idea, is a general if all things are normal and equal. But I think they might have different advice, at least some attorneys, when you look at the circumstances which might have led to what occurred. Now, this is completely and totally my take on the situation and why I didn't get excited about it, why I didn't think they were trying to keep things from the public. So you had a COO come into a job and officially start like 3 days before the budget presentation, which needed to be presented in a specific way in a specific time for changes in adoption. A treasurer secretary who was recently back from maternity leave, and a new clerk who was newly hired and being trained. It could be reasonably, possibly speculated The documents were prepared quickly and didn't have markings on that clearly and definitive denoted that these documents were drafts, and did not have them secured with watermarks that would prevent them from being tampered with. And that's very important. I don't know that that's the case. I am taking on speculation that given the shortened time frame, they could have easily been working on this presentation right up until the time that it was presented. And generally there's an extra step in adding the watermark. If a budget, you work on a budget in one program and you'd traditionally export it like into another program to put the watermark. Some of the budget programs, and I don't know about what they're using particularly down there, you can watermark inside the program, but I don't know what version and what all they're exactly using. I am aware of a prior secretary treasurer stating that was the case, the last minute preparation. And she had 20 odd years of experience in preparing them with a full staff and she wasn't out on maternity leave coming back at the time. So it could stand on given the abbreviated time that you officially had the manager and, those things going on. But changing anything on that draft after the council, had time to review it or it was put out for review for the public could have been argued to have been a change. Because, hey, if you changed this thing, what else did you change? In this instance, the staff did not have months to prepare. They didn't have workshops to build on. And as many municipalities do, they had days at best when sorry, my daughter just came in, kind of threw me off. When, they're preparing, right, there's the camera. They were doing their month end, their year end, their budget preparation. So they had a lot going on, as well as literally cleaning up a mess in the office while trying to get that budget prepared for review and having to conform with the specifics of the law. All of that could have reasonably been speculated as to why things weren't up to a higher level of standards everyone would like to see going forward. I know I had access to the budget if I wanted to go down and review it. I will tell you that I did not for multiple reasons, but I listened to what they were reviewing there. There were no red flags to me, so I didn't, jump in and say, oh, I'm going to go down and see this. But all of those things that were going on is enough to explain the situation. But there's more, but wait, there's more. There have been actual misrepresentations of borough information in the past by former council members, and Joe Von Sass was part of that. We have to remember the cost-benefit analysis prepared by former council member Pasco, which was supported by Von Sass, where information was misrepresented and fabricated and used to try to mislead the public. That isn't speculation on my part. Those documents are real, exist, they have been put out in the public. It's there for you to see. And if I knew that, and I was the manager and the administrative staff situation, I would want to make sure that any drafts or any paperwork that I'm putting out there was tamper-proof and properly secured, and I was taking every measures to make sure they couldn't be manipulated or misrepresented. And I know darn well that Chief Woods was aware of that past incident. He was around when it happened. It's not like it happened a billion years ago. And there's been other misrepresentation in borough records where Von Sass and former council members were complicit in, and were other times where information was purposefully misrepresented or the community was lied to. And like I said, Councilman Von Sass actively participated in that. You have to remember the past police contract negotiations where Joe left a voicemail for the police association ending negotiations. And council denied that ever happened. They said it never happened. They went so far as to repeatedly say it to the point that the police association issued a formal statement And they sat in a meeting. You can watch the video. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. And for Councilmember Pasco asked, "Did you hear a voicemail? Do you know anything about a voicemail?" "I don't know anything about it." Joe sat there with his hands folded and his mouth shut and did not ever say, "Yeah, I did it. And, I, as a member of the negotiation committee, you told me to." He didn't stand up for that. Instead, he sat there closed lipped and let them call the police liars. And that voicemail exists. It still exists, folks. I, per FCC regulations, cannot play it on the air for you, but it is real. It is there, and you don't have to take my word for it. And Joe also was one who directly claimed that Chief Woods wanted a 22% increase for himself in those exact negotiations. He said this to me. And he was advocating his officers, and his claim, Joe's claim, was Chief Woods was asking for a 22% raise for himself and was not advocating for anything for his officers, which, if you know anything about McSherrystown, we are under civil service, and under civil service laws, that's not even possible. And time again, it was asked, "Show me the proof on this." And none has ever been given. There is no documentation that's been given to me ever. There has been nothing that's proven that. But to this day, it's still a claim. Even up through the 2020 elections, it was still a claim that was made not only by him, but by Rob Nider, by Steve Pasco, by others in that group. So given that, knowing borough information has been misrepresented and misused by a current sitting member, council member, colleagues, former employee, to the point that a lawsuit occurred, and there is a non-defamation agreement that's still in place. And it was Chief Woods who had to sue them to get them to stop. And so, knowing all of that, it's not beyond reason that the COO and even council members who weren't a part of that first thing, but aware of it, or staff, would do everything they can to make sure information that they were putting out there could be secured, couldn't be tampered with, was accessible, that they were making every best effort to conform to the law, to work to accommodate, to those who expressed a hardship, and which this COO did. This is, "I can't come in," which seemed like a hollow excuse, but he's okay. "You can't come in these times, then tell me when you can, we'll work it out." That was protecting the borough by doing that, not trying to hide things from the borough residents. And it was also an attempt to protect the borough staff from any possible attempt to, not from them, but from them being accused of anything. So they conformed with the law and did what they had to do and got things together rather quickly. By the way, we put together a budget, I believe, that shows a surplus, has no tax increase, and so that was a pretty good feat. And then you also have to look at context at what was done by the borough in prior years. The draft budget was never posted online that I'm aware of. In fact, I don't recall any detailed public discussions of the budget. In fact, I believe I was told by former members of that had sat in on past budget meetings that there was an executive session at least one time where they discussed the budget, which isn't an approved budget. I mean, you might have one thing that's legal that you would have to talk about, but you couldn't do it in detail. If that occurred, that's a big no-no, and then they'd come out and they'd vote on it. So that's, if you compare to what happened this year to what in past years, it's night and day difference. In 2019, I don't recall. It might have been the year where they kind of got the budget at the last minute. There's a video of this. And I stood up and asked council, "You're telling me you don't even know what's in it other than your contribution as chair. Please do not vote on this budget until you have a public review. Know what's in the budget before you vote on it." They voted on it anyhow, and they ended up adopting it. I think that was in 2019 because I think it got reopened in 2020 when the new council came in. So I'm not just saying that this year was handled in the ideal best case scenario. I'm saying that given everything, if you know everything, no, it wasn't handled up to the standards that I or anyone else would like to see, but it wasn't illegal. And not even the state association's media attorney said it wasn't illegal. They just said it's not the ideal way you want to do things. You have the same people there with a year under their belt. What will next year look like? I can only guess. I can speculate what I'd like to see. I advocate for transparency at its fullest, accurate information, education for the public, and especially in the finances. And I'm hoping that like somewhere around July, they'll do a 6-month review and they'll start doing budget meetings where they're piecing this out and talking about things that might need to come up. And they have months to properly prepare a budget with public discussions. So when it does get adopted at the end, the public and the council has a very thorough understanding of what's in it and why it's in it. I don't see any hint that there was an attempt to block or hide information from the public. I see it as an attempt to conform to the law, make sure the office staff is up to speed. They're able to close out the month, close out the year, and get the, budget handled. There's a big difference between a duplicitous year after year practice and then working within extreme limitations. This article attempted to paint a there when there was no there. If that makes sense. That's a statement we use a lot in this house. There was no there. I don't know what you're working at. This was really meant to paint a picture of Joe challenging the lack of transparency, the lack of honesty, when an honest attempt on his part at communication could have really gone a long way to answering any of his conversations, but he doesn't want to do that. And he'll show you time and time again that it's not about questions and being included or excluded. It's about causing a scene and getting his name in the paper. At least that's what it appears to me. If he wants to fix the problems, then you make an honest attempt at communication and to work with the people around you. You don't wait till the 11th hour and then say, well, I didn't have time. Well, you had time to spend a couple hours in there talking to former employees. So why didn't you have time for something as important as the budget when you had 3 weeks? So did he have plenty of time to access that? Absolutely. He had nearly 3 weeks. He chose not to reach out in a timely manner, and he has voted on a proposed budget with less review in the past. Check out the videos, folks. That's all I can tell you. Go back. Videos aren't going to be before the latter part of 2018, but go request meeting minutes. If they had any meaningful discussion, it should be represented there. It's perspective and context. Again, it's not an ideal situation, but there's zero evidence of trying to hide something from the public. I mean, and for even to, Joe has taken part in financially questionable past practices as a member of council. Let's talk about the crab and beer parties paid for with tax dollars that had a neighboring municipal employee as a guest that was also appearing to engage in questionable side deals between those two municipalities. Let's talk about a several $100 piece of jewelry purchased for Boring, that's her last name, Luann Boring, when she retired with taxpayer money. That was neither in the budget nor discussed in a public meeting nor voted in a public meeting. So how'd that happen? Only knew about it because I saw the bills paid and questioned that, and then I asked for the receipt reflecting to see what it was. There's multiple times that Joe Von Sass appears to have been paid as part of the bills, and there's no reference to a discussion of him recusing himself from the vote because he was receiving payment. Did he recuse himself? Did he state why he was recusing himself as you're supposed to? So how many times did he vote to pay bills and fail to disclose that he was one of the bills being paid? And what about other members of the council? Did they not have a right to ask questions and say, or were they doing the same things? I don't know. But given the fact that it's occurred where it seems like it's commonplace in the past, you know, and we also have legal action taken against an employee by attempting him to remove them from the police association as a means to dismiss them. There was no vote at a public meeting to do that, so that's an action taken outside of a meeting. And you can go back and look at the documents relating to the labor situation, which end in the labor board questioning the action and refusing to take action until the matter's reviewed by council and looked at. I am the original banner waving member of the Transparency Fan Club, but you have to take a full look at Joe's actions as a council member, his defense of those actions, and compare them to what he's accusing others of before we applaud him for attempting to create yet another disruption at a meeting, which leads him to look like the hero of his own story in a newspaper article written by who seems to have a very friendly relationship with him, who also happens to omit Joe's relevant misdeeds from stories he's writing or important contextual details that might paint him in a not so flattering light. I mean, look at the way Mr. Hale twists the wording of others, uses careful phrasing, and carefully recreates a narrative to support his story's purpose, which largely seems to either cast shadows on other or praise or at least paint Joe in a more advantageous light. It's suspect. That's not reporting, folks. That's creative writing, and it's a clever attempt at gaslighting the public by manipulating the public into thinking events didn't happen the way history, witnesses, documentation, videos, emails all prove. We're going to take a quick look at this third story where the headline read, McSherry's town councilman told meetings not the time for questions. Sorry, I'm getting some messages from people who apparently are listening. So good to know somebody's listening live. So again, McSherry's town councilman told meetings not the time for questions. First of all, that is not what was said if you go back and watch the video. But again, the video doesn't tell the whole story. You only have what occurred right there. But it's a really catchy headline. And I give Mr. Hale props for the hook of a headline in an attempt to boost circulation for his newspaper, because that's in part a reporter's job. But there's several things that I like to nod at creative writing in this piece, and so we're just going to hit on a couple of them. The first one is, even before New Sunshine Law changes, Joe Von Sass, Steve Pasco, Rob Nider were masters at trying to disrupt the meeting, slide stuff in that was either improper, meaning it was having to do with a legal matter or personnel, or an attempt to just be disruptive. There were also direct attempts to go around chairs and bypass chain of command, which again touches on 22.4 that we're going to talk about in a minute, I promise. And that's a really important one. But, this is one of the big reasons that former President Smith, and yes, folks, President Smith, who is now Council Member Smith, is my husband. There's been no secret about that. We've talked about that from 2019 to now. But he verbally and I believe sent email to the council reminding them of the process to get items of concern on the agenda. And he referenced that in that last meeting. But it's not just because, I'm a control freak and I don't want you talking. There are some very important legal reasons why that is done, and not just by this municipality. And Mr. Hale should know, most municipalities have a process by which council community, things get on the agenda. You don't just jam stuff in whatever you want. But number one is so that the public would have notice of topics of interest they may want to participate in and comment on. 2, should a topic lead to needing a vote, especially under the new sunshine law, there has to be proper notice to the public for that discussion and that vote to take place. And also that any items covered by privilege, which include personnel, legal also covers contracts or negotiations, real estate transactions, bids, those kinds of things. There can be all kinds of number of things under legal, but personnel is a big one, and legal is a blanket. Both, they need to be properly scheduled to be discussed in an executive session if needed. Contrary to popular belief, you can't just have an executive session because you want to. There are certain things that are allowed to have an executive session called for, and the Sunshine Law tells you what that is. And there are certain things they tell you that you can't have it called. Sorry, I was just looking at something here real quick. Forgot to do something, not that it matters. But yeah, we're going to put that up there because I forgot. And especially because I'm going to do a video here, clip in a minute or two. So hang tight for that. But these points, these reasons don't stop council from asking questions. They actually encourage engagement of council, but through proper chains of command to ensure council members are following the law, and also to minimize attempts to disrupt, which if you go back and see videos, go back and look. I can pull them up and show you clips, and maybe at some point between now and May and now in November, we will have a run of some of those clips. But you'll notice, to borrow a phrase from Mr. Hale's attorney, many municipalities have similar type rules. So this is not new to McSherry's Town. I was instructed by a former council member who and staff about how things get included for discussion because I'd asked, and it sounded like a very similar process. So because I was sent to talk to a chair, I was told that I had to talk to this person about this thing or that person about that thing, and had to talk to the manager, and the manager sent me to the treasurer. And so after 15 years of being appointed or elected an official, this should not be new to Joe, and he should be leading by example, not intentionally pushing buttons, attempting to trigger a reaction, and then crying foul when he gets held accountable. Remember that term reactive abuse we talked about? That's a classic example. If Joe genuinely thought that the CDL statement, which wasn't the way he remembered it, which is what he said, there were several ways that he could address that. Let me get this video ready for you. It's only about 30 seconds, so bear with me. But if, he could have gone to the video like I did. So we're going to play that clip. Give me 1 second here. Ooh, dog barked. Let me switch this over. I'm going to mute my mic while I do that, so bear with me. Okay, so you heard that yourself, was willing to and working towards. So right there, had he gone back to the meeting video, that could have answered his question. That would have been the appropriate thing to do. Or he could have reached out to the chair of personnel, CCing the COO, and posed the question asking for clarification, as President Kogan pointed out in the last meeting. That clip was from October 26th, and I put up on there, I think it was 20.19 or right in about there where I started this video. But depending on the response that Joe got, he could have requested the subject be added to the agenda to be discussed, at which time they would have determined if that could have been made, if they needed an executive session. So here's where executive session would have come into play. Had there been discussion of his qualifications and other information originating in an executive session, and there wouldn't have been a video to go back to check, there might have been reasons for that. So then they would have gone back to the executive session. There would have also been opportunity to ask other foundational questions that personnel, so that you're protecting their rights. That's why a lot of things are done in executive session. You don't want a situation that would lead to a legal issue, or you don't want people attacking staff in a way that makes them feel like they can't work there. So that's why you have those discussions in an executive session. But all of those rules in no way limit to Joe or any council members access to information. But it does, those rules do afford public notice of a planned topic for a public discussion, and afford the employees the privacy and the protection they're entitled to, which was the point that Councilman Smith was making, going, you've been told that one more thing doesn't fly. You take that on top of other times where things were just jutted in there to try and disrupt the cadence, the flow of the meeting, or just there were times that things were brought up that were improper that led to things that could have very easily gone down the path of an active lawsuit discussion or other things, contract negotiation. And you're actively in a non-uniform contract negotiation right now with the employees. So it's improper to be having some of these conversations in a public setting like that without knowing the scope of things that are going to. And honestly, after 15 years on the council and being told multiple times, Joe should have certainly known that. Okay, I was notified that there was some problem hearing the video. So I'm going to go back and play it one more time, and hoping that I can boost the sound on it for you, because I really want you to hear for yourself the video. So give me 1 second while I switch over and do that again.
An opportunity at this point. We have voted to put 2 part-time positions in so that we could have flexibility for the borough, for the Public Works Department, and keep some help. We have had the opportunity of a gentleman who stepped forward who was looking for full-time. He has a background in, he has a certification for spraying. He has willing and has been working towards a CDL. His history is what's the word I'm looking for? Ground landscaping.
Okay, so I'm told you could hear it this time, which I'm glad. And I might even post the video separately so that it's on the Tim page for you to hear. And Mr. Hale, not being new to covering municipalities, is well aware, or should be. Most municipalities have procedures and similar rules for getting items on the agenda and protecting employees, and also making sure that council, who may be in various states of awareness of the Sunshine Law, that they all comply to it. And in some very real cases, some things require you publish it on the agenda to have that as a topic or a vote, or, so his twisting of that matter really was solely to sell papers and possibly aid his friend in how he's presented in light, which would aid his reelection. And that all contributes to gaslighting not only council members, but the public, and goes to engaging in that reactive abuse of council members, because as as Councilman Smith admonished him, then it's kind of like, well, and why can't we talk to employees? He's continuing to persist and he's pouting about this, and he's taking do you see how they tried to quiet me? I'm just, and this is no joke. This is a representation of a conversation that is in a closed group. I thank you for your support. I'm just trying to bring these things to the public. So he's saying in a private closed group, I'm just trying to bring information to the public, when he knows darn well what he's doing is misrepresenting information. And that's why we're going to talk about 22-4 next, because that's part of this. The other part of the story of not being allowed to talk to, why can't we? Well, the McSherrystown Borough Code is separate from the state borough code. And in McSherrystown Borough Code, there's a section 22-4, and many municipalities have similar ordinances or laws to limit the interference or limit the chances of abuse of power from the legislative branches of municipality, which are your councils, your supervisors, to the administrative staff. Most businesses will even have a chain of command where this is your supervisor and you go to them, and then there's a hierarchy. So this is not strange or abnormal in any way. And section 22-4 is titled Procedural Limitations on Council, and states, other than for the purposes of inquiry, the council or any of its members of council's committees or its members shall deal with the administrative services solely through the borough manager, and neither the council nor any of its members shall give orders either publicly or privately to any subordinate of the manager. Number 22-4 kind of tells us this was an early adopted part of McSherrystown's Borough Code, section 22, number 4. So subsequent sections in that law would have in that area, ordinances in that section would be 5, 6, 7, so it tells you organizationally where it is. So it certainly seems to have been in place for all of the 15 years that Joe was a council member, and is not new. So, okay, so why didn't he know that it existed, or what it was, or what it applied to after 15 years of service? But let's go back to that for a second. For other than the purposes of inquiry. So if I were the chair of finance and needed something from the treasurer secretary for a report I was asked, or any other chair that during a duly convened meeting I was asked to prepare or tasked to do, the proper professional way to request that would be to email the secretary treasurer, CCing her direct supervisor, and in this instance, that would be the COO, Chief Woods, to request what I need or follow up on the details and ask, like, hey, when can I come in to pick that up? Or, I need these particular items when you prepare that report, that transitory communication. Why would I CC the department head? One, to keep informed as the COO that I'm working on that a request was being made, and establish a timeline, and establish the expectation of what was being worked on, and or ask clarifying questions or whatever. And two, I would do that to make sure that I was being clearly compliant with 22-4. And this also limits the staff from being distracted with interruptions for people just popping in, wasting their time chatting, or eliminates, any speculation of an attempt at somebody to do something. I want to talk to you about an incident, a very real incident, where an employee and a council member directly defied the exact scenario. So there was an issue near Single Lake. This was during a time when we had an interim manager, and a member of the maintenance crew was given instructions to contact the interim manager for issues, to coordinate resources, authorize expenditures if necessary, to update me on what's going on. But rather than follow the direct order that they were given or the appropriate chain of command laid out by the Borough Code, the employee directly defied that directive and instead called Joe Von Sass. Joe, being well aware of the protocol, did not contact the interim manager and say, hey, I got a phone call, and what do you want me to do with this? Instead, responded to the call. Then Joe billed the borough for his time. Now, I'd have to go back and confirm, but I don't recall Joe recusing himself from voting to pay that bill. So I can't really tell you if he did or not, but I don't really recall a time where Joe recused himself stating, I can't vote on this because I'm being paid. And maybe that needs to be looked into. How many times that occurred over the last 50, how many times Joe, you're not going to see on past votes whether or not he voted or not, but you would have to have the recusal and the reason noted. So they didn't do voice votes before 2020. Not only did Joe directly defy Section 22-4 of the McSherrystown Borough Code in that, the direction given by the interim manager was also ignored, which Joe supported and participated in, with an employee defying a direct order who didn't have the authorization to engage Joe's paid services. And Joe knew that, or should have, after 15 years on council. I mean, when Steve Pasco was appointed to council, it's my understanding he was working part-time, and it's my understanding that he needed to step down from that position because he couldn't be a paid employee. And I understand that in event of emergency or contract services, if there's an emergency, there are certain allowances you have made, but wouldn't you make every attempt to avoid the appearance of impropriety if you were a sitting council member? And shouldn't the council paying those bills make sure that they appear above reproach and that a member of their council isn't getting paid unless it's disclosed or noted, or in some way, shouldn't there be some sort of similar type safeguard so that friends of council members don't get funneled business, or council members get called and then bill? I just think that that's questionable and should be looked at. And I'm not saying that the council did anything wrong by paying him, and I'm not saying that Joe did anything wrong by billing the borough for services rendered. I'm saying that there needs to be safeguards in place to prevent abuse from happening, because you can see how very easily it could happen. I'm saying that council members need to understand the law so that they can conform with it. And this is why you have protocol and policies and procedures, and why it's important that they be followed and enforced. And if Joe was doing this in partial of his defense, how many other times did council members in past that had businesses in town also do similar things? And also, we know several times council members, including Joe, spent an extended period of time based on employees' own statements while they were on the clock, and they were witnessed being at council members' places of business while they were on the clock, even though it was a directive that you weren't supposed to be doing that. I personally had a conversation with a former employee who expressed concerns about speaking out improper behavior by council members for fear of retaliation of firing. That's not okay. It's just, there are reasons why Section 22-4 and similar worded ordinances or laws in municipalities exist to prevent even the appearance of impropriety. And so this display in the last meeting by Von Sass with a healthy assist from Hale, that's really reactive abuse on a large scale. And he's an elected official, and also gaslighting. And he's an elected political official who is using it as part of his re-election strategy, an attempt to manipulate and distort events and mislead the public, and that's not okay, and that's why I'm here. That's why I'm doing this, because it's not okay. You should trust that information that's being put out either by your council as a whole or by a council member or even the press, if they're reporting on something, it's as accurate and true as reasonably possible. we all get things wrong. I've gotten things wrong on here. And when I have, I've come on and said, you know what? I was wrong. So and so pointed this out to me, and I don't do it in the last 5 minutes. I usually come right out at the next time and apologize and correct the record. At least that's what I've done in the past. But we've seen these scenarios time and time again with Von Sass, Pasco, Nieder, Boring, and others, both in chamber and community settings, pushing, poking, prodding, and intentionally pushing the limits and then calling foul or claiming victim status when limits and boundaries are enforced or they're held accountable for their actions. So I have no idea if members of any council in McSherrystown or elsewhere are going to hear this, but I'm telling you, if that occurs to you, I don't care how much shaming they attempt to do to you, keep standing up and enforcing those boundaries. Do it respectfully, do it politely, do it intelligently, but do it. Do not let people get away with misleading the public intentionally. I mean, and when I talk about it happening, there are countless examples from 2018, 19, 20, and 21 that you can look to, including the last meeting. I don't have any clue why Mr. Hale would work with Mr. Von Sass in this. It's my opinion that, one, the drama helps the circulation of the paper, and that is struggling. That's not a speculation. COVID hurt them. They've reduced their printing, they reduced their reporting staff. They're, doing what they can to keep circulation up, and these headlines are great for that. And two, Joe, and his companions are using this as part of their re-election strategy, which I find abhorrent because it's intentionally misleading the public about things that are going on, intentionally misconstruing and misleading information, putting it out there, and making it appear there's a there when there's nothing there. Meanwhile, Joe, who claims transparency, participates in private closed groups and chats out of the public eye, continuing to further this. And I say that because I've been shown them. Because not everybody loves what he's saying. I've had people he's gone into their home and do work for, and they either directly or indirectly let me know things that he said and asked me about them point blank. They said, Joe said this. And I'm like, well, this is where you would go to check that. This is where you would go to check that. That's not exactly right. And here's what you weren't told. And that's not okay, to misrepresent documented facts and information while trying to gain the trust of the people to get your vote the next go round. And the lies, and I say lies because when they were documented to be not correct lies, there's voicemail, there's emails, there's video, there's other documents. He participated in some of those things personally or by supporting former council members. Again, we talked about the police association refusing to negotiate with the borough, saying it was the police association, and then calling the police liars when they said there was a voicemail left, despite the fact that the voicemail clearly was Joe's voice and that he left the message. Claiming Chief Woods wanted a 22% increase, making false accusations about Chief Woods along with other past council members that resulted in a lawsuit and a non-disparagement agreement. Email exchanges where the council conspired to end the K-9 program and discussed improperly disposing it. They discussed ways in which you could dispose donated assets, some of which were improper, for the K-9 program. And yes, that's done in emails, which I have possession of, which have been made public. And then discussing among themselves in the same emails how we're not going to talk about these in upcoming public meetings. And then actively sat in public meetings and said, we had no intention of ending the K-9 program, despite their emails, which he participated in, clearly planning to do otherwise. He was taking part in the things that were actions outside of meeting, the labor board, the crab parties, the retirement gift. No discussion of those things, no public vote, no, you know, he's a public official who willingly sat in violation of zoning ordinances, claiming he didn't think they should apply, despite 15 years of sitting on the council with greater access to the same rules and information everyone else in town has, and we're expected to live by and conform to them. You know, he doesn't seem to know zoning. He doesn't seem to know borough code. He doesn't seem to know sunshine. He doesn't seem to know finance. I'm wondering what he did learn in 15 years on the council and why he deserves to be on longer. If he didn't learn it by now, what are the chances he really is gonna, how many years does it take for you to, I get 1 to 4 years even maybe, but 15? It's my opinion that he's a political official who thinks rules don't apply to him, drunk on a thimbleful of power. And it appears that the only interest in running for re-election is his own self-interest or protecting the interest of others. Because it was under the protection of the old council, which he and his friends abused zoning ordinances, used their position to punish those who spoke out and spoke up against the abuse. There's suggestion that there's a potential for personal or business profiting from elected or appointed relationships. He's only really been transparent about one thing, again, in my opinion, that his motives are self-serving and a desire to protect those motives and ensure that he can continue to do it. Otherwise, and he will continue to protect not just himself, but others who are even willing to lie for him. You didn't hear the voicemail, did you? Did you? I mean, that's not okay. I'm not going to sit here and pretend, tell you that this current council's made up, of perfect people, that I agree with every decision or procedural action. But I have no evidence that this council has operated outside the public eye or without public discussion, unlike the former council did. And I don't agree with all their votes, but I don't see the remaining 7 elected or appointed officials around that table or using their position to attempt to personally or professionally profit, conceal violations, or intentionally misrepresent information or mislead the public in an attempt to get reelected, protect personally self-serving agenda. I mean, if it does occur and I see it, and I don't care who it is, I will speak to it, but I'm not seeing evidence of that. And especially if the local press is going to aid that attempt to misinform or intentionally conceal or distort information while reporting to the public, somebody's got to speak to it. Somebody's got to tell you, and I don't see anybody else doing it. That's why I'm here saying, look, there are these other things that are occurring. Like it or not, you can still disapprove of the way things are happening and voice your opinion that this shouldn't happen this way, but it's not what it's being made to seem. No one said council members shouldn't ask questions at council meetings. They were told, you have been told time and time again how to get something on the agenda, and you are willfully disregarding that, disrupting this meeting, and intentionally trying to cause a ruckus. Knock it off. Joe's version of transparency, in my observation and opinion, is to lie to the public and claim victim when caught, abuse his authority and position, and cry foul when held accountable. 4.5 years I set out on this path to call attention to abuse, correct misinformation, provide the public with information they could use to educate themselves to take to the ballot box. Since 2018, you've seen the addition of agendas for the public, which were not being handed out and went to meetings initially. They weren't being published in advance. You went from having to attend a meeting in person to be informed about what was going on. Your local cable access channel, if you have Comcast, and you can watch it on Facebook, or you can watch it through Community Media's website. You actually had you've had walkthroughs of the budget discussions and more access to borough information than ever before since 2020. The borough voted to eliminate their pay. So they're literally working for you for free because they thought it was the fiscally responsible thing to do. They've come a long way since 2020. They still have a lot more work to do. There's a lot of room for improvement, but things finally seem to be headed in the right direction. It's a slow and tedious process, but the abuses, misuses of resource, and I hate this term, but the good old boy network of the past finally seems to be crumbling and breaking down. So it's up to the people of McSherrystown if they want to invite the same people back to the table who perpetuated those ideals before, or if they want to continue to work toward change. And if you don't like the options you have sitting around that table, I strongly suggest you consider running to take the seat of those you don't like, or actively supporting the candidates you think can better serve your community once they declare. Because your vote is your voice. 4 years ago, you voted for change. There's been a lot of change in that time, but more is clearly needed. We aren't done yet, McSherrystown. I think we're going to stop there. I'm sure there's lots of things I could have touched on that I didn't, since the chat really wasn't functional the way that it is. I'm going to take a quick look here and see, but you can reach out to me on the page. You can post comments sorry, I'm reading some things. Yeah, I was just reminded that Joe previously called out whether Joy should have recused herself on a vote as well. So he recognizes that others should do it, but hasn't done it himself in the past, apparently. I mean, there may have happened a time where it happened, but I don't know. So, and I'm not the only person that was calling for this. I saw the people who ran in 2019 for the 2020, Dan Colgan, Joyce Murrin. You had George Staub running at that time. He didn't get elected, but he was very vocal and coming to meetings and asking questions. You had Bill Smith, you had Bart Lookenbill, and you had Kathy Tote before she was mayor. You had other people. So they were questioning and they stepped up, and they're not perfect, but they're doing as good a job as I think anybody could do without any background or experience. Now you have Donna Spengler. George is now on council, and Tim Klunk, who are also learning. There's a lot to learn, and there's a learning curve to all of this. And I think that they're not perfect, but I don't see them actively, that I've been made aware of, trying to misinform the public about things that are going on. You don't have to like someone to agree with them, and you don't have to always agree with everything someone does that you like. So, like I said, I think that, let me just double check and see if I missed anything. But so again, I'll try and figure out what's going on with live. I think the Tim page may have been flagged, not allowed to do lives. Don't know why, but we'll try and look into it. And it also appears to maybe have been shadow banned, because as the administrator, like I said, I had to look for my own posts. So we'll try and figure out what was going on there. I apologize for how long this has taken. This is not what I wanted to do for this evening, but I thought it was really important that we get through those things. Comment on the video if there's something you want more information about. You can direct message through the Tim page, or if you have my contact information, you can reach out to me. I will not say so-and-so asked unless you tell me that it's okay or that I should. But, we'll have to wait and see if there's a need for another episode. And when I say a need for the rest of the story, it's because if the information if there is an intentional attempt to mislead the public. I'm going to do my best to give you information that I have access to because I think you deserve that. And I would hope that you would share with me information if you have it. If I get something wrong, correct me. But like my kids love Nanny. She says, "When you need me but do not want me, then I must stay. When you want me but no longer need me, then I have to go." So I will keep the promise. As long as there's a need, I will be here trying to level the playing field, providing you with the rest of the story when others intentionally attempt to misinform you, omit facts, and try and make sure that you have a full picture before drawing your own conclusion. I will also do my best to bring you information on the upcoming municipal election dates, deadlines, details in case you are thinking about running for office. Share links on meetings, and while my health is much better, I am still recovering. So we're only going to really do this when we have to. And if enough people ask me about the same thing, I'll probably address it on here rather than one issue at a time. So until next time, folks, good night, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Take care and God bless. Oh, one more thing. I do want to ask, this isn't something I normally do, but this time of year, I noticed we've had a lot of deaths and illness affecting the McSherrystown community. We've had quite a few teachers pass at Delone, family members pass, first holidays without that. And also several people that are very, very deeply entrenched in McSherrystown who are either having health issues or family health issues. So this isn't typical for something that I would normally do on the Tim page, but given the circumstance, I will not talk about any names or any individuals. But if you could please keep those in need in your prayers and your thoughts, those who need healing to find healing quickly, to be better, those who are suffering through illness or going through something, rather heavy weighing on them. If you could just keep them in your thoughts and prayers. You don't need to know who they are, their circumstances, but whenever you do that, whether you pray the rosary or pray at night or just good thoughts, if you could pass those on, because I know quite a few people who could use them. But that's it. That's all we're doing for tonight. So thank you so much for everything. I really appreciate your time, and we'll get back in touch soon.